Everyone's a James of Pandirasbox. Okay, I'm going to go over the concept of a false dilemma. And if you're not familiar with what a false dilemma is, there's a couple ways it can be illustrated. But I'm going to give you the definition of what a false dilemma is in critical thinking. It's also called a false dichotomy, the either or fallacy, the fallacy of false choice, black and white thinking, or the fallacy of exhaustive hypotheses. It's a typological fallacy that involves a situation in which only two alternatives are considered when in fact there are additional options. Sometimes shades of gray between the extremes. For example, it wasn't medicine that cured Miss S, so it must have been a miracle. Now, this is like the false dilemma between the Marcionites and the Ebionites. Well, Jesus was only a man or he was only divine. It couldn't be possible that Jesus and Christ were separate. Or the false dilemma between science and religion, where um, another way of looking at a false dilemma is science and religion is opposed. This is created by atheists. The atheists claim to be representing the scientists or the scientific community, and they claim to be representing the opinion of the religious people accurately too. And they go there opposed, when in fact Catholicism and science are hardly opposed, and Hinduism and science are hardly opposed. So what religion they're talking about is anyone's best guess. It may be talking about Scientology, because Scientology is quite opposed to actual science. Mormonism being quite opposed to actual science too. So they claim to be representing Christians, and Christians are opposed to science. Another thing about the false dilemma can arise intentionally when fallacy is used in an attempt to force a choice. If you are not with us, you're against us, etc. But the fallacy can also arise simply by accidental omission of additional options rather than by deliberate deception. I thought we were friends, but all my friends were at my apartment last night and you weren't there. See, so it can come that way. In the community of philosophers and scholars, many believe that there's no citation on this. Um, I don't know exactly how that backed that up, but I'm reading Wikipedia. This is not how my book would have done it. I'll probably use my critical thinking book next time. I'm just too lazy to get up and get it. In the community of philosophers and scholars, many believe that unless a distinction can be made rigorous and precise, it isn't really a distinction. An exception is the analytic philosopher John Searle, who called it an incorrect assumption which produces false dichotomies. That's a good way to look at it. It's an incorrect assumption producing false dichotomies, which is exactly what the early Catholics did with the Docete, or Docete, should I say, because they didn't say Docete in Greek, they said Docete. Um, so yeah, false dilemma after false dilemma. Another false dilemma out there I'd like to go over is the Christ myth theory versus the historical Jesus theory. Um, which is not much different than Ebionites versus Marcionites. Um, one runs off the premise that Christ was merely a myth who was ripped from a bunch of other religions. They use Justin Martyr to try to prove this, and they use an argument from about a million arguments from silence. Christ was merely a myth. He was never meant to be taken literally. He didn't occur in history, which is actually taking it farther than Marcion ever took it, because Marcion said Christ occurred in history as a man, um, who came down from heaven in the 15th year of Tiberius, I believe. Basically, what the Gospel of Luke says. Then there is the historical Jesus theory, or Jesus seminar, which posits that uh, Jesus existed, but we can't really know the historical Jesus. That's their conclusion because of the sources are um, untrustworthy. Sources that have been copied thousands and thousands of times are somehow untrustworthy. Whereas sources from the 15th century that deal with Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar and the earliest documents that we have are from like the 11th century. Oh, that's more reliable. Documents that were copied only a couple of times. Oh, somehow copying documents less makes them more reliable. See, this is this is wishful thinking. The truth is that it doesn't make whether a document's copied 1,000 times or one time doesn't make it any more or less reliable. What makes it more or less reliable, the variable in this equation that makes it more or less reliable, is the ability of the scribe copying it. What also makes it more reliable is actually, in a sense, having more other copies to compare it to. So, in a sense, having more of them doesn't make it more reliable to have more copies, but it makes it more ready to check for reliability based on the abundance of copies. There's probably less difference between a copy of, say, the Gospel of John from 200 AD versus a letter or versus the Gospel of John now than there is between the earliest printing we have of Josephus and the latest printing that we have of Josephus. There's probably less differences between the documents. In fact, that's kind of unfair on Josephus. Let's put it this way: there's if we take the whole Bible, there's probably less differences in the entire Bible than there is in the entire book of Josephus. That wouldn't be surprising. And Josephus was copied less. Okay, so what is funny about this historical Jesus thing is the unfair unfair shifting in the burden of proof, for one thing, the unhumanly high standard that they have for what establishes history. Since when, and this is new to me, since when is history viewed as some kind of infallible subject where I can simply just look, and these standards have never been kept by anyone before now. This arises out of actually the false dilemma of thinking that history is somehow opposed to myth. And this is not the case. So the difference between history and legend or history and myth is the simple difference that myth is usually an allegory for history. Legend is something that is so far back it can't be verified by extra sources, like such as the Bible. We don't have extra biblical sources for the conquest of Joshua. So we can't confirm one way or another whether his name was really Joshua, or whether he really had as many soldiers as it claims, whether he fought with the weapons it claims, or whether he fought Canaanites or whatever. We can't confirm any of that. All we can do is take it on the Bible's word, not on faith, on the word of the Bible. There's a difference between having faith and taking something for its word. We can take the Bible's word for it because that's our only choice, not because it's a matter of faith. It's not a matter of faith to believe the Bible. The other thing that we can do is see, for Jesus, for example, they go, well, we can't verify him in history. Why do we need to verify someone in history when we have the Bible, which is a actual historical document, believe it or not? And believe it or not, they didn't have a big laundry list of rules you had to follow to write history. History, while it was a genre, it didn't have all these rules. For example, so you go off history. Well, the thing is Herodotus is, along with Thucydides, the earliest history books we have a copy of. History is a Greek literary genre, Greek subject, Greek invention, and a Greek practice. there actually were not any standards for Herodotus to follow. Herodotus simply, to him, history was just writing about just the broad range of human experience and the background to different cultures and nations. Um, but he ignores a lot of these nations' history. Um, so it wasn't about having everything. A history book was more like an encyclopedia in his time. It was about collecting as many facts as possible. I mean, he was writing about geography and things like that in a history book. So, what exactly is history and what disqualifies the Bible from being a history book is anyone's best guess. I've had several college professors try to explain this to me, and I had no problem passing any of my history classes. I passed them with A's. So it's anyone, like I said, anyone's best guess what exactly their point is. I think it's just them trying to look educated, and look like they're smarter than you, but that's not the case. And the word history, if you know anything about it, in Greek is historia, and it means inquiry, which what is an inquiry? It's a means of gaining knowledge by investigating. So history was actually an investigation. So the historical Jesus is the investigated Jesus. It's not a Jesus rooted in what you would call time and space, for history is improperly understood in the Western mind nowadays as something that occurs chronologically in time and space. You've got his history confused with chronology. So is there a chronological Jesus? Yes. Is there a historical Jesus? Well, you have to create him because you have to investigate him. And so, what makes the average person or a college professor even, um, what makes them qualified to investigate anything? Are they investigators? Do they have any kind of license at law or investigation? So why are they tampering with this um, subject that really is more of a legal discipline? um, so it's also the discovery, collection, organization, or presentation of information about past events. That's all history is. So history is basically a science based on hearsay. It's better to call it hearsay. That's why Tacitus is writing a thorough history. We look back and we go, oh, Tacitus is history. Tacitus is so full of hearsay, no one in their right mind would think it's more historical than the Bible. It's got hearsay loaded in it. The Bible has direct quotations from Jesus talking. And Tacitus and all these other writers, they have to make crap up. You know? Um, they don't give direct quotations a lot of times. So, how are we disqualifying the Bible as history? I don't understand it. This is pretty much a modern phenomenon. But you know, the things that are legends are the stories of King Arthur. Yet the average person nowadays probably believes the story of King Arthur over the Bible, and that's what you'll get in an atheist household. You're going to have people believing King Arthur was real. I mean, they made him look like he was real in the movie. King Arthur never even existed. I mean, that's almost a fact. And if he did, he existed as several other people. But oh yeah, let's believe in him. Um, it's just weird. It's just an inquiry. So if I want to write a history on Jesus, I would write down whatever anyone said about him. But that means the history would include everything from the Gnostics, everything from the Catholics, everything from every sect of Christianity, Ebionites, you name it, pagans, and all of it would be admitted as true. I'd say, oh, Celsus said this, so and so said that, Origen said this. That would be a history on Jesus. That would be the historical Jesus, the Jesus that impacted history. Jesus historically has been a lot of different things. So what makes the historical Jesus more accurate than the reality of who Jesus really was? Is the history the reality? No, never. It can't, because it's an inquiry into what other people thought about him. If anything, it's the life that he takes on in other people's mind. Anyway, Peace be unto you, and don't be deceived by history.